Hello again. My name is Corbin, or Baines Bloom if you prefer. This is the third video in a series following the 20 Games Challenge put on by SDG Games. Now, before we get into things, I want to apologize. This video took me far longer than I intended and far longer than it had to. I'll explain more at the end, but for now, let's just get to the good stuff. The third game I chose was an Atari game called River Raid. You play as a fighter jet flying down a river. Along the way, you'll find a myriad of objects. The simplest are boats and helicopters, who sit on the river and move back and forth, bouncing if they hit a wall. Then you have other jets, who fly all the way across the screen unimpeded. And finally, you have fuel depots, which you can fly over to increase your fuel gauge. They can all also be shot to increase player score, but if you collide with anything other than the fuel depots, you lose a life and are reset to the beginning of the level. If your fuel gauge hits 0, your run ends regardless of how many lives you have left. The game is split into multiple levels, each separated by a narrow section of river and a bridge that needs to be shot and blown up to proceed. The original Atari game actually used procedural generation to create its river, but it only had the one seed, meaning that every player got the same level. For this challenge, on top of recreating the function of the original Atari game, we were given stretch goals of making the levels generate dynamically on the fly and filling the game with a bunch of fun particle effects. I also added on a requirement of my own. I wanted to release this game as something people could play, something I could point to as a complete project. By and large, I think I've succeeded. By the time that you're seeing this video, Data Raid is playable over on itch, and the source code is available at the corresponding GitHub repo. Please feel free to look through it all. Since the code is publicly available, I'm not going to go through the individual scripts and the nitty-gritty this time around, in part to focus more on the overarching ideas and journey, and in part to make sure this video isn't an hour long. If you have any comments, critiques, or suggestions on the actual code, then please let me know. Now, let's get to the interesting part of the video. Firstly, let's look at the basic functionality. The base of the player controller was easy enough to implement considering its similarity to the controllers from Pong and Breakout. The only real difference was an added control to accelerate or decelerate tied to the vertical input axis. The level generation was the first part that took a real bit of thought. I knew I didn't want to go for full procedural generation, so I ended up creating a segmented system instead. As the player flies down the level, new pieces are chosen at random and spawned in front of them, skipping pieces that have already been chosen. This happens 5 times, after which it spawns a narrow piece with a bridge that the player must shoot to continue. After that, the old level is deleted, the array for used pieces gets emptied, and we start spawning random sections again. On each of these sections is a pre-placed selection of boats, or packets as I called them, that move side to side, and fuel depots, or charge depots, that refill your fuel. Jets are spawned on either side of the screen, a random distance in front of the player, then fly across the river. As in River Raid, all of these can be shot, which increases your score, and explodes with a nice little particle effect. This all forms the main gameplay loop. However, while I was doing the research, I found that I didn't really like how slow the original game was, so I made Data Raid run a little bit faster. This did necessitate some changes in terms of both gameplay and design. Firstly, fuel depots had to work differently. In the original River Raid, when the player flew over the depot, it would gradually fill the fuel bar. With Data Raid moving faster, the player wouldn't get to spend nearly as much time over the fuel depots, even if they slowed down. So, instead I just made them fill up the gauge by a predefined amount when the player collided with them. Ironically, that made it a lot simpler to program. The other main thing that needed tweaking was the designs of the level pieces themselves. I had to make sure that each one was traversable at regular speed and at least mostly traversable at full speed. I also had to tweak the placement of boats and fuel more than once during QA to make sure that nothing was too frustrating. Aside from these few changes and reskinning everything into its Tron-esque presentation, everything else about Data Raid is about the same to its predecessor. Despite the relatively simple gameplay, I was able to learn a lot and implement a lot over the course of this project. I got more experience implementing a menu system as well as a proper heads-up display, which has this little speedometer that I'm inordinately proud of. I also got my first real introduction to particles and shaders by making these little pixel explosions, air trails, and the scrolling grid in the background. The main thing that I'm excited to have learned and implemented over the course of Data Raid is a signal bus, though. And yes, I know that the signal bus is probably the most commonly used code pattern in Godot, but I had never really used it before. None of my projects got far enough to be that complicated. Regardless, if you're like I was at the start of this project and haven't looked into signal buses too much, or if you know nothing about them at all, I'm going to give you a quick rundown. A signal bus is a code pattern that allows you to easily call a signal from one node and have it affect any number of other nodes without having the source and the destinations know about one another. To do this, you set up a list of signals in a script that is available from anywhere in your code by setting it to autoload in your project settings. This creates a basic node with your script attached at the top of your scene tree and allows you to reference that script from anywhere else in your code. With that, you just tell your source script not to emit its own signal, but a signal from the list in your signal bus. Conversely, if you need to know when something happens but don't care exactly what triggered it, just hook up to the signal bus instead. I mainly use this to track events that happen between the main controller and the moving pieces like the player, fuel, and enemies. Score increases, refueling, dying, finishing a level, all of that is routed through the signal bus. It was all super clean and easy to use when I finally understood how and why to use it. I also experimented with a similar system for audio. Like scripts, you can set scenes to autoload, so I set up an audio controller scene that handles the background music as well as creating audio sources at particular locations, which I used for the explosion sounds. I didn't really get to flesh it out since it's a little overkill for a project like this one, but I was excited. Next, I want to talk about the main stretch goal for the project, particles and visuals. This is something I still don't think I'm incredibly comfortable working with, but only because I didn't do as much experimentation as I maybe should have. There are only 3 particle effects in River Raid: the entity explosion, the bridge explosion, and the speed trails, which are modulated by the player's speed. Make no mistake, I'm pretty proud of how it all turned out, but it doesn't feel like enough. In the future, I think I want to really knuckle down and do some research on visual effects, particles, shaders, and the like. It might not show up in my next project, but hopefully you'll see more from me on that front. That being said, I am really happy with the way the whole game came together visually. I didn't do any preliminary sketches for the actual visuals, and most of the assets I ended up using for the final product were supposed to be placeholder, but I ended up liking them so much I just ran with it. It's a little vibrant, but I think that's part of the charm. As for the audio side of things, I didn't really do any work there. The menu track is from Bit by Bit Sound's 8-bit action music booster pack, while the gameplay soundtrack was composed by my amazing partner, Zidernia. She also made the little UI hover sound effects. There's a link to her channel down in the description, which you should definitely check out. She makes amazing music. All the other sound effects were from BPI's 8-bit SFX pack. I just plugged them in where they needed to go. All the credits for things like that are in the description on itch and the README on GitHub. Speaking of, the last thing I want to touch on here is GitHub. At the beginning of this project, I knew I wanted to use GitHub throughout the process so I could get experience using it and so I could have a map of the project over time. Beyond that though, I had little to no plan. That lack of direction and path to follow led to me forgetting to commit, not having standard commit message formats, and just generally having no idea what I was doing. I still have little to no idea of what I'm doing with GitHub in regards to solo projects, let alone group projects. But now that I know that deficiency exists, I plan to do some research on solo and group developer workflows, common industry practices, and things like that. And that's pretty much it. Like I said at the top of the video, if you want to take a closer look at the project's code, it's currently available on GitHub, and there will be a link to the repo in the description. There will also be a link to the game itself, which is playable over on itch. Now, with the main things out of the way, I want to give a brief explanation of why this video took so long. In the time since I last uploaded, I left the country for the first time, finished my associate's degree, went through a bout of depression, proposed to my girlfriend, and then married her. It's been busy, to say the least, and it's still busy. Right now I'm working on moving countries, and when I'm settled, I'm hoping to go back to school for my bachelor's. So suffice to say, I'm not sure how long the next video will take me. I'm also not quite sure what the next video is even going to be. The 20 Games Challenge is a wonderful thing, and I do want to continue it, but I'm having trouble finding the motivation to work on the next ones in line. Instead, for the time being, I think I'm going to focus on small personal projects and researching my areas of deficiency, visuals, GitHub, etc. When those projects release or when they hit a point of development I'm comfortable with, I'll make videos here showcasing them and how they were made. My wife and I are also planning to return to streaming after a very long hiatus, and creating gameplay videos over on our joint channel, Parasol Productions. We've already played some really interesting games, and we've got even more lined up, so please check those videos out when they release. With that all out of the way, I want to thank you all for watching and sticking around. As always, if you have something you're working on, please feel free to share it in the comments. It's always awesome to see what people are making. Or just call me out for taking so long. It's genuinely helpful. Regardless, I'm not done, I'm just switching gears. So, I'll see you all in the next one, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.